Good evening, everyone, and a warm, warm welcome. I say a warm welcome because it is certainly exceptionally warm in Woodside Park in the suburbs this evening. But despite the sweltering heat which we and the plants around us are feeling, we are looking forward to a scintillating Hackenbroch's Helpful Half Hour with our very, very special guest, Arlette Garcia. Arlette, good evening. Can you hear me?
Hi, hello, how are you?
I'm very well, rather hot wearing a suit in this weather, but
Yes.
needs must what I do for my community. Now, this evening's Hackenbroch's Helpful Half Hour, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you can hear me, is all about the garden, the outdoor life. And before we introduce Arlette formally and hear about how she got into this in the first place, I'm going to just share with you a very brief 1-minute idea, because I was thinking as I rushed back after Mariv to the computer, I was thinking that in fact, gardening is perhaps the oldest thing in the Bible, right? Think about it. The first profession, the first things that we hear about Adam and Eve is that their job was to take care of the Garden of Eden, right? Now, I could do with Adam and Eve in my garden because it certainly doesn't look like the Garden of Eden. But the idea, of course, in that sense was the spiritual garden. But nonetheless, the physical is a mere manifestation of the spiritual. And therefore, gardening and looking after the plants, we know that there's a mitzvah in particular with fruit trees that we're not allowed to cut them down. We're meant to cherish and to bless every year the new blossom on a fruit tree. So gardening and taking care of the ecosystem in which we live is something which is exceptionally a Jewish idea. And with that, it segues into us formally introducing Arlette. Arlette, good evening. Can you share with us how in the world did you get into becoming a landscape gardener? Tell us a bit about your background.
I've been doing this since I graduated. Basically, I graduated as a landscape architect, you know, in my late teens, and subsequently I worked for for architects and more civil and civic spaces, designing hotel landscapes, areas like Blue Water. I worked for a company that did King's Cross developments. I did some projects abroad and so on. And then I had children. I couldn't really travel and have children that easily. And I decided, okay, I love gardens. I've always loved gardening, which I did with my dad. And I decided I will go and be a garden designer rather than doing more civic sort of work. And I've been doing that for about 15 years, freelance. So
lovely. So I want to take you back because I remember, you know, we grew up the days before gardeners. You know, people used to do the garden themselves. What did it, you know, were you interested with your dad? You know, did you actually really help your dad? Was it spending time with your dad, or was it a matter of, you know, I actually enjoy, you know, Mother Nature and getting close to, you know, the plant?
Very, very much. Yeah, my dad had an incredible garden, and I used to help him with all the vegetables and tomatoes and seedlings, dahlias, rose cutting, you name it. Which obviously we absolutely hated, but he made us kids all do it. And we had a real passion for nature in our house through both my parents actually, but my dad was an avid gardener. It was his pride and joy. And so I combined that with doing the landscape architecture, which is more sort of architectural, basically.
Right.
College.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed, you know, is that, you know, the look of gardens has completely revolutionized and changed, you know, and the size of gardens has changed as people have extended their houses. You only have to look at the Woodside Park newsletter that goes around. I forget who writes it, but always there's complaints about the green is disappearing, concrete is filling up the spaces, and now we have the horrible astro that people are putting down because they want easy care. So I'm gonna go hard on you, and we're gonna get down to, we're gonna get to the root of this tonight. Excuse the pun. And we're gonna try and understand a bit about gardening, and hopefully people will have a fresh appreciation. So we've got a lot of questions are coming in from those that are the amateurs and those that are the avid gardeners, and I'm going to start with the first question is as follows. I want to attract wildlife into my garden. What should I plant? Okay. What would you suggest?
So as we go along, Jax is very kindly assisting in the background. So Jax, if we could have the wildlife slide, please. So I've prepared a few things for this evening. For wildlife, you need to think whether you are trying to attract birds, bees, butterflies, or all of them, all of the above, frogs, amphibians, little insects. To be quite succinct, butterflies and bees love colour, and they love flowers like the ones in the picture, which is they're called sedum and echinopsis, those two. And they've got loads and loads of tiny flowers within that huge flower head, and they love going to plants like that where they can pollinate very, very easily from flower to flower. If you want to attract birds, the best thing to do is have lots of hedges and have lots of berries for them to eat. And the most amazing thing you can do for your garden, and I'd love to hear everyone wants to, is to have a pond and attract frogs and amphibians, because they will then eat the slugs in turn to keep the pesticide use down. So those are my tips for a wildlife friendly garden.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I have to tell you that our neighbour, they actually have quite a well-known garden, and many a time I found my kids. I found my kids in the pond, and they've come home with a whole pond on them. But we'll save that for another time. So there's some wonderful tips. We're going to move on. A lot of questions are coming in. The second question for you is: how do trees have a role in shaping our garden? How do trees have a role? How should we use the trees?
Okay, so again, Jax, please, if you could have there's the slides on the role of trees, please. So this
1 minute. Can we get a bit closer, Jacqueline? Can we even see a bit closer? I'm sorry to be so particular, just at my age. Oh, just want to get a bit closer. Can we or not? I don't know if we can. If not, don't worry. Okay, don't worry. We'll just move the screens. Oh, that's a bit better. Oh, and then we lost it. The trees are coming back.
Again. So for me, trees are the most important structure in the whole garden. Even before I've worried about the hard landscape in a design, I worry about the trees first and foremost. And in many gardens that I've done, I have actually removed a lot of trees, and the clients often, when they go, get very, very aghast and worried. And then when we come back and put new trees in, then their delight is just unbelievable. So this is a garden that I've done recently in Stanmore. And in this garden, we removed, there are actually laurel bushes there, most of them. And they were huge, like small trees. So we removed the majority of them. And the client actually wanted to remove that willow in the middle, which I wasn't that in favour of. But as it happened, it did make the garden look really, really fantastic. And we put new trees in, which is the bottom slides.
Yes,
and we start with the theme of green and uniformity. And uniformity can really bring an amazing effect to the garden, a very calming effect. So we use 15 of the same species of tree, which is the liquid amber. And that red tree that you see in the bottom left slide is a red hazel that existed in the garden, but was completely covered up by all the laurel trees that were growing there. So the role that trees can have can be promoted by actually taking out the old trees, which aren't doing a good job of work anymore. And if you've got the space, I mean, I know obviously everyone hasn't got this garden, but I use this as an example to show you that you can actually be brave and take trees out as well as putting in new ones. So you need to think about your whole plots, because trees really, really are the structure of the garden. Before you put all your small plants in, think about whether you love your trees and you're passionate about them. And if you're not, think about changing them.
Right. Now, when you talk about taking out trees, and we haven't discussed this offline, but I know in my garden's a very mature garden. There can be orders on trees. You can't just take out anything, can you?
No, you have to check if it's a conservation area. Then every single tree potentially in that garden will have a tree preservation order on it. If it's not a conservation area, then individual trees certainly can. And obviously, I'm not in favour of removing trees that are doing an amazing job of work in the garden. So if they've got a TPO on them, then it's normally for a very good reason. In the garden that I just showed, I removed very, very overgrown laurels, which they'd just been left for years, and the previous owners hadn't really done anything with them. Jax, if we could have the next slide on the role of trees, please.
Oh, wow, stunning.
So this is more akin to what we'd have in Woodside Park. This is a garden in Mill Hill. And here they had one big birch tree at the back of the garden there, and a few old bushes. So I put in 4 trees which are exactly the same. So sometimes it's nice not to actually have a load of variety, because it brings a peace and calm to the garden that that otherwise might not be there if you've got one of this and one of that. It depends what the client likes. Jax, if we could have the next one, please. It's number 3. Now, this is a very well-known garden in Woodside Park by me. It's my garden. I've only got a small garden. And the reason why I put this slide in is because I actually put this tree in the middle here in. So I chose what's called a multi-stem tree because I wanted to try and hide the view from my neighbours into my garden. And this tree will eventually go up, and it's basically like a big bush on sticks, if you like. So the role here was in order for me to have some more privacy. So I didn't just choose a single stem tree, I chose a much more bushy tree. And finally, number 4, please, Jax. This is another garden. It's in Berkshire. And I'm not promoting removing all trees from the garden. In this case, we kept everything. Just put a hedge along the back, and obviously this absolutely magnificent London plane was the star of the garden. And before I got there, it was completely overgrown. So we had this huge lawn going up to it, and just kept it very, very simple with some beautiful pebbles and stones around it, because it didn't need anything else. It was such a fantastic tree that that was the highlight of the garden. So I was just trying to show a range of how trees help shape the feel of the garden and what you're looking for. Yeah,
I think that's something that we don't necessarily appreciate, and take into account that the trees can very much give a feel, and they can have a different purpose, as you showed. You know, either uniformity or, for example, covering up, and there's all different purposes to trees. Very interesting. We're going to move on because the list of questions that are coming in is huge. This is obviously I've touched on a popular topic in Woodside Park, garden suburb. Okay, can you tell me, Arlette, what are the top 5 plants for your garden, or for somebody's garden, that are trending at this moment in time? What's popular? Let's hear.
Difficult to narrow down, but I feel I have a few slides here. So Jax, please could we have the top 5 plants, grasses starting off with, or any of them, doesn't matter which one first. So I think that since I've been doing this over the last 10-15 years, grasses have become more and more present in garden design. And here, this is a garden in Oxfordshire that I did, and the client wanted to have a Japanese theme. So it's actually a very, very, very simple pared down palette of plants, of which there are about 5 or 6 plant species, but I've used them in multitudes. So the grasses form this wavy barrier to, actually that's the River Thames beyond there. And then I put one single Japanese maple, that red tree, at the back. So I think simplicity in planting design is very, very important. You don't need to necessarily put everything but the kitchen sink in your garden. Sometimes if you just pare it down, it could look very, very effective. Jax, can we have the next slide, please? Whereas compared to this picture, which is, I feel very, very much in vogue at the moment, which is a very wild mix of plants. And this is actually my front garden, whereby there's delphiniums at the larger at the back, there's scabiosa, which are little purple ones at the front, campanulas is the tall white ones, and the little orange plant there is called geum, which is an incredibly useful plant. It lasts for about 6 weeks, 8 weeks in flower. And so what I've done here is to try and get a successional planting with the flowers that I'm using, but also the other job of work it does is cover up the ground. And next slide, please. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
So simplicity, again, is this Oxfordshire garden. It's the front. Sometimes it's nice just to be very, very simple. And these are olive trees, which again are very, very fashionable and very useful because they're evergreen and you hardly need to water them and they are beautiful. And Jack's the next one. Lastly, I think this is, and what I was trying to show here is the use of colour. So if you decide on a palette of colours for your garden, one thing that I think is incredibly useful advice is stick to it. If you, in my own garden, I've chosen purple and orange and white are my main colours, and I only buy plants that are those colours. So if you, for example, here it's silver foliage with red and red flowers, keep to those ideas because then you'll get a really unified garden, even if you don't really know what plants to buy. If you just say I'm only going to have red or I'm only going to have silver, it's a good tip, I think.
Right.
And so yeah.
Right. No, it's beautiful. It's all the pictures were, you know, stunning gardens, stunning.
Thank
you know
you.
I want to ask some more practical questions, okay? Because at the other end of the spectrum, okay, there's the novice gardener, and then there's like me, the non-gardener, okay? So here's a question. Let's say I decide, because there's an area that I want to do something with, and I'll make a box. I think that's what they call it, right? One end to stop the footballs smashing everything down, right? Okay. And now I want to put something there. Now, I personally, okay, I'll let you into a secret, viewers. I like everything has to be very neat, symmetry. I like, you know, I like everything to be like soldiers. Everything has to be in my life. So if I like symmetry, I saw a few people had box hedging. And then somebody came over to me and they said, Rabbi, whatever you do, have we got problems in Woodside Park with box hedging? It's infested. So tell me, Arlette, help the rabbi. What should he be putting for that symmetrical, tidy look, but I can't have box hedging? What would you say?
So there are many alternatives to box hedging, and yes, there is a big problem with box hedging. There is something called box blight and box caterpillar, which you can, if anyone's got box hedging in the community, you can find, there are ways with little sprays that are eco-friendly to help it, but I got box blight on my box balls in my garden. I'd had them for 10 years. The lot went within 6 months, they were dead. So I'd say don't plant any box. There are alternatives. I've used a plant called Arlette Garcia, which is a very, very, very tiny leaved holly, actually. And that works very, very well. And there are other alternatives. I think ligustrum is one. You can use tiny little azalea plants, which is like small rhododendrons that actually flower. You could use those as little bushes around your box area. You could use something called osmanthus, which again smells beautiful. The leaves are slightly bigger than box. And another one is yew hedging, which most people probably have in their, I've seen around, it's very common, but you can use that as a little tiny hedge that box would be, and you can shape that really well as well. So there are alternatives. There are others as well. The list is about a dozen things now that can be used. The most effective, I think, is the Arlette Garcia if people are thinking that they want to use something.
Edith Granata. Okay, watch this space. Pictures coming your way of my Edith Granata eventually. Okay, so the next stage, Arlette, now you've identified in my box, in my space, what I'm going to put there. So now, obviously, the next stage is the rabbi needs to go and buy the stuff. Now, obviously, he's very rushed for time. He doesn't have, can't go running around. You know, if I go to B&Q or I go to Finchley Nursery, is it all the same? Cruise Hill? You know, I have no idea what I'm getting. All I'm looking for is good quality stuff that will do the job. What would you say?
I think that all of those places you've mentioned are very good, including B&Q. They are fantastic B&Q, and they're actually very good value, especially if you go at the beginning of the summer. One mistake that people may make is that they might think that to buy a bigger plant means better. Doesn't necessarily. It's quite good to actually put smaller plants in and watch them grow and get into buying them as early as you can in the season, February, March even, and try and plant them out. And by the end of the summer, you'll probably have something that's the same, that will double in size. And over 2-3 years, you'd easily catch up with had you bought the bigger plants in the first place. Finchley Nurseries is very, very good. They have perennials, which they do deals on. So you can buy 5 for, I don't know, whatever the price is. But I bought a lot of the plants from my front garden are from there. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten, where was the other place you mentioned?
So the Cruise, so in the past.
Cruise Hill, yes. Cruise Hill is very good. Yes, it is very good. You need to shop around there because there are some deals to be done, is what I'd say about Cruise Hill. Okay.
Next question. Okay, and I know that some people have put some questions on the chat, and we'll get to them. I'm just going to finish this backlog first. Okay. So somebody says, I'm not able to afford a gardener and I'm not as agile as I used to be. Sounds like me. Okay, what can I do to prevent weeds among my plants? Oi, the weeds of Woodside Park. What can we do? What's the easiest thing to do with the weeds?
So there are 2 things I'd say. Number one, if you're starting out and you're doing a new patch, plant things very closely together. Don't listen to necessarily all the books. I would say squash them in. If you have to remove plants later, fine. But if you've got the time and the money, squash them in. Number 2, mulch, which everybody knows about. Yeah, that's like bark chippings you put on top of the soil once you've planted. You can do that, and that's a good weed preventative. Number 3 is to use things called ground covers, which are plants that splay out sideways when you plant them. They don't grow up tall, they go sideways. A few examples for you are geraniums, which people traditionally think of the red and pink bright things that they see in Spain. Actually, in England, they're a lot of the varieties of ground covers. Another one's Mexican flea bean, which is a little plant called, the Latin name is Arigaron. Again, it spreads all over the place. You can even put ivy down. You can pack them in closely. Yeah, so this is another garden I did, and this is what I'm trying to say, where the garden was very, very densely planted, so that you try not to allow too much space for weeds to come in and compete. Another good tip is to use things like hostas, which are big-leaved, low-growing plants, because then they will cover over the soil quite a lot with their large leaves. But you want things called ground covers if you're looking online. Those are what you want to look for, that type of plants.
Right. Okay. Very, very helpful. So the next question is about, people are asking about, one second, people are asking about, they live in flats. Okay, some people live in flats.
Yeah.
Now, people want to know what they can grow that will look nice, that will be colourful on the balcony and easy to take care for. What would you recommend for the garden, you know, for the balconies of the flats?
Yep. So, Jax, could we please have, I think it's called a balcony, the next slide. So very, very 2 suggestions. In fact, it's the plant I just mentioned when we were talking. That plant on the right is called Arigaron, the Latin name. The English name is Mexican flea bean. And that is a daisy that will last for about 3 months in the summer. It actually has a few little salvias coming up, the purple spikes amongst it. Fantastic plant. Once you put it in, you won't need to garden it. On the left-hand side, very obvious choice, lavender, lasts for about 2-3 months in flower. At the end of the season in September, when it's finished flowering, you get a pair of scissors, chop it down into a nice round ball, take about half the size of it off, and it will come back again the next year into a lovely shape. Where people go wrong with lavender is they leave it and don't do that, and it gets very, very leggy and scraggly and big in their gardens, and then they don't like the shape of that plant anymore. And in the end, you might end up throwing it away. There are lots and lots of other suggestions. Azaleas are brilliant because they'll fill up your balcony pots without having to do too much work. I'm just trying to think of some others. Well, roses, you can get little bush tea roses. You've got to look at the variety you're buying. You don't want to buy climbing roses because they'll be the wrong shape for the vessel that you're going to put them in. And one other tip with your pots is to make sure you get little feet for them to allow the water to come out the bottom without staining your patio or your decking or whatever paving you've got underneath.
Right.
I could go on and give you a gazillion suggestions, but be here all night.
No, that's perfect. You've done very well, Arlette. Now, one of the perennial problems of living in Woodside Park is the flooding of the gardens. So, for example, in Folkeington Corner, many people have willow trees. And when you see a willow tree and you move in, you think, oh, that's so nice. And then it comes to the winter and you realize why they stuck a willow tree, but it hasn't done the job. So basically, half your garden is flooded for half the year.
Yes. Yes.
What can we do about it? It's a big problem in Woodside Park.
It's a big problem, and it's a problem I come across in many gardens, particularly where we are in North London because we're on London clay. So it compacts in the summer and goes hard like a pan, and then in the winter it collects all the water on it so that it slides, and you get this top layer that you end up sliding around on. Unfortunately, there isn't a very quick and easy and cheap solution. In my own garden, we had a terrible ponding problem like you're describing, and we built a network about 70 centimeters down or a meter down of perforated pipes. In other words, they're drilled into so they can receive water on the top, and we then had to disperse of that water into the back of our garden. We're lucky because we live on the brook, so we could easily put that water into the woodland behind us. If you're not in that position, then you still would have to do that drainage system that I mentioned, and then you can get something which is a crate system, which you can buy online. And when I say crate, I mean it would be something you put a huge dog in. It's a massive box that would then take that water and slowly it would feed into that crate and act like an underground pond system in a way until the water is dispersed from that crate slowly. So that it's a job that would cost a lot of money, thousands. My own garden costs quite a lot of money to put the drainage system through.
Wow.
So you put a pond in and you live with the dry and the wet.
Right, right. I think we've got a mikveh in ours, but we'll discuss this another time. Okay. Anyways, the questions are coming in thick and fast, and I'm going to go through the questions in the chat now in no particular order. The question from Joe Diamond: what's the best time of the day to water your trees as plants? I presume, and plants.
Water is definitely, especially in this weather, waste of time almost watering during the height of the day, obviously, because it's going to dry out quickly, is when you get up in the morning or about now. And for trees, you can water from above, that's fine. But for most things, if you have delicate flowers, especially that you're worried about, try your best, although I know it's very time consuming, not to water right on top of fabulous blooms that are coming out at the moment. Because sometimes the rainwater can hurt those petals. But for trees, not a problem. In fact, for trees, Joe, you can leave the hose on and just leave it there. I leave the hose on for 5-10 minutes on each of my trees at the moment and just let it do its thing. Yeah. because they really
Well, I
need
got
the
news for you. If Joe needs watering, I've got so much water in my garden. I'll send it over to her. There's no problem.
Are you going to transport it there?
I'll transport it free of charge. Okay, Ian Katz. Should a dead fir tree be left in place or should it be removed? The birds seem to love sitting in the tree branches.
Difficult one. If you don't mind the look of it, leave it. But of course, after time, it could become dangerous. So, but that's after a few years of being of dying in spots. But eventually, it could come down on you. So, be a little bit wary. But you're right. I mean, birds. When we were talking about the nature before, one of the things birds, bugs, all of them love is deadwood. Perfect for invertebrates, all sorts of things. You're doing a very nice job leaving it if you can withstand having a dead tree in your garden.
Yeah. Now talking about trees and dead trees, here's a question for you. What about the following situation? You got your house and you got your extension in the garden. Now people plant and they don't necessarily think about distance from the house, and then all of a sudden they get themselves into trouble a few years later when it sprouts this huge fir tree. Is there a magical formula as to what trees you can plant and how close you can plant to a house? Is there? Can you give us some advice?
Yes, I can, but every single tree needs to be taken on its own merit, obviously, because we're talking about things that grow from 3 meters to 30 meters tall. On the whole, I try to avoid putting in any fir trees like Camiscia Parish, which I'm sure most people know of. Leylandii is the English name. It's not the right tree for any garden, in my opinion. Any garden.
Wow.
I'm doing a garden at the moment for somebody, and it's in Essex. She has a lot of land. She's got acres. She's inherited 3 Leylandii it's basically a farm and she's got an old farmhouse. There are 3 Leylandii outside, and even with that scale, I still don't think they're right. There's actually some law about the use of them. There are loads of other conifers that you can get if you want an evergreen that are far more dainty and pretty and do a better job of work. People plant Leylandii because they're cheap and they get big. But in the end, what happens is you have to get your tree surgeon in every year or two to take the top of them off because they are too big. And then that costs you several £100s per go. It's not cheap. And you kind of wish that you'd never gone there. So Leylandii
are a false economy, basically. They're a false economy.
As far as coming close to the house, you can actually buy root barrier for trees, or you could put some walling down underneath the soil if you wanted a particular tree and you only had a small garden. But overall, I would say there's a whole book written about it. Right plant, right place. Buy the right tree that's going to grow to the right size for that plot. That is fundamental. And I've made that mistake before, by the way. I'm no saint. I've put trees in that were too big, and we've had to take the tops off, and so, you have to get tree surgeons in to look after them, which isn't the end of the world. But with something like Leylandii, very difficult. Right.
Ian Katz, another question. Can you recommend a surgeon in Woodside Parks in WP? Seem to be lots around. I presume you mean he does say a tree surgeon. I was going to say the tree surgeon.
Yes, I can. I can recommend a company called Squirrel that I used to work for Clifton Nurseries, which I don't know if I'm sure some people know, in Maida Vale, and we used Squirrel. They aren't based here, but they're good. That was a few years ago, so whether they've changed or not, I don't know. I haven't used them recently because my contractors have had their own tree surgeons in their teams, if you like. So, but they don't do it specially for individuals, so I can't recommend those contractors just for tree surgery. But when we were in Clifton Nurseries, we did use that company, and at the time, a few years ago, it was good. So Squirrel, Red Squirrel, I think. Sorry.
Okay.
If people want to contact me directly, I can answer that question for you. No problem. I can't remember if it's Squirrel or Red Squirrel. Sorry.
Okay. Some type of squirrel. Okay. And also a final question for me. You know, you see people nowadays, they like the front of the house to look nice. So they want to put in these pots, these squirrely, you know, the squirrely
Yeah,
ones.
yeah.
And when you see them initially, they look great, and you know it's all symmetry, and it looks one on each side. You know,
Yeah.
are they you know durable, or are they you know something that's a one? Yeah.
Durable. Yeah, very much so. But it's like everything else. You got to look after it and give it a nice haircut every year, or it's not going to continue to be looking
Right.
like you did when you got it in the nursery. So yes, they're
Right.
good and easy to do, but you do have to give them a haircut.
Right. Right. I guess the message is that you need to, you know, what you put in, you get out. It sounds like gardens take up quite a lot of time.
Gardening takes up a lot of time. Yes, I've
A
only
lot
got a
of
small
time.
garden here, and it takes up a lot of our time. Yes, well, we've got an
Right.
allotment as well, which we do. But yes, we spend a lot of weekends digging and doing. I like
Fantastic. Fantastic.
it.
And so do many people in our community. So we want to thank so much Arlette for coming on tonight and giving of her wealth of experience to the community in landscape gardening. Anyone that's interested in further advice or professional services from Arlette can be in touch with me directly in the week, and I'm happy to, with her permission, to give the details out. But it's been absolutely fascinating and very enlightening, Arlette, and we look forward to having the Rabbi's Kew Gardens in the not too distant future, please God. And in the meantime, we thank you so much and wish everyone well. And please God, we look forward to seeing you on the next of our season and the next of our season next week. Hackenbroch's Helpful Half Hour, same time, same place, from me and from Arlette. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you, Arlette.